We are starting with Chapter 1 of the Beginning of Days. When we last left off the Silmarillion, we had read through the creation story. And Eru, the god in Tolkien's universe, was creating the world with his, call them lesser gods, the archangels, if you will, Manwe and Melkor and Yavanna and everyone that eventually became the Valar. And what this is going to start with Chapter 1, is more or less how they created the world and how the elves came to be. And my hope is that if we go with enough time, I can get through about 20 pages, which is everything about the coming of the elves, as well as describing two of the Valar in pretty great detail. So we've got the beginning of days, of the coming of men, and of Aule and Yavanna. It is not in that order, though. I apologize. I said that backwards. We will start with the beginning of days. And actually, before we get started, honey, is there a way you can flip that light switch and turn that on? I just want to test the... we lost the sunlight. Yeah, that's better. That's better. Thanks, everyone. All right. Thank you to everyone here on Twitch, TikTok. Everyone, I am going to sign off for right now. Thank you so much for joining us. If you feel so inclined, join us on Twitch. My screen name is Don Marshall72, same as it is on here. The link is in my bio. Thank you all so much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye. And now that it's just us, welcome everybody. You just finished watching the Lord of the Rings Extended Edition yesterday? Well, then this is going to be the show for you. This is the show for you. Hang on, I'm going to flip this light switch, see if it makes a difference. Yeah, that's a little better. That's a little better. I'm a little shiny, but you're here for the audio anyway. So, is everyone ready to get started? I've got my Lord of the Rings Burger King cup. It's solid glass, and they gave them out in like 2001, 2002. One of my favorite things that I bought. Found that at a yard sale. You know what time it is. Time to embroider your Middle-earth map. Jam, are you embroidering one? That's awesome. Let's begin then, shall we? Put on your favorite Lord of the Rings music. Welcome to Silmarillion Sunday, Part 2, Chapter 1 of the Quenta Silmarillion, the history of the Silmarils, of the beginning of days. It is told among the wise that the first war began before Arda was full-shaped, and ere yet there was anything that grew or walked upon the earth, and for long Melkor had the upper hand. But in the midst of the war, a spirit of great strength and hardihood came to the aid of the Valar, hearing in the far heaven that there was battle in the little kingdom, and Arda was filled with the sound of his laughter. So came Tulkas the Strong, whose anger passes like a mighty wind, scattering clouds and darkness before it. And Melkor fled before his wrath and his laughter, and forsook Arda. And there was peace for a long age. And Tulkas remained, and became one of the Valar of the kingdom of Arda. But Melkor brooded in the outer darkness, and his hate was given to Tulkas forever after. Tulkas is one of my favorite of the Valar. He is I always picture him as a very big, burly dude that just wields a giant axe with a really long beard and laughs in the face of danger. Kind of like a Gimli, but maybe a little bit more Adonis looking. Also, M. Ground, thank you very much for the subscription. Much appreciated. Thank you. Let's keep going. In that time, the Valar brought order to the seas and the lands and the mountains, and Yavanna planted at last the seeds that she had long devised. And since, when the fires were subdued or buried beneath the primeval hills, there was need of light, Aule, at the prayer of Yavanna, wrought 2 mighty lamps for the lighting of Middle-earth. which he had built in the encircling seas. Then Varda filled the lamps, and Manwe hallowed them. And the Valar set them upon high pillars, more lofty far than are any mountains of the latter days. One lamp they raised near the north of Middle-earth, and it was named Iluin, and the other was raised in the south, and it was named Ormal. And the light of the lamps of the Valar flowed out over the earth, so that all was lit as it were in a changeless day. So when he says lamps, they are literally being lit with the light of the world, in a more, and not in a metaphorical way, in a more literal way. Then the seeds that Yavanna had sown began swiftly to sprout and burgeon, and there arose a multitude of growing things, great and small, mosses and grasses and great ferns, and the trees whose tops were crowned with clouds as they were living mountains, but whose feet were wrapped in a green twilight. And beasts came forth and dwelt in the grassy plains, or in the rivers and lakes, or walked in the shadow of the woods. As yet no flower had bloomed, nor any bird had sung, for these things waited still their time in the bosom of Yavanna. Remember, Yavanna is the Valar of nature. Think of her like almost a druid of sorts. But wealth there was of her imagining, and nowhere more rich than in the midmost part of the earth, where the light of both of the lamps met and blended. And there, upon the Isle of Almaren, in the great lake, was the first dwelling of the Valar, where all things were young, and new-made green was yet a marvel in the eyes of the Maker, and they were long content. So when we started with the creation story, this is where we had the tumults, right? The fire and the lava was clashing with the water, and the mountains and the valleys were competing for space. And now that they have defeated Morgoth and sort of settled down a bit, this is when things finally start to take fruition. We've got fish in the seas, and beasts roaming the lands, and the plains are starting to grow, and the grasses and the trees. Now it came to pass that while the Valar rested from their labors and watched the growth and unfolding of the things that they had devised and begun, Manwe, and you'll remember Manwe is the head of the Valar, Manwe ordained a great feast, and the Valar and their host came at his bidding. But Aule and Tulkas were weary, for their craft of Aule and the strength of Tulkas had been at the service of all without ceasing in the days of their labor. And Melkor knew of all that was done, for even then he had secret friends and spies among the Maiar, whom he had converted to his cause. This is the first time we see the corruption of the Maiar. We get first meaning of it. So when you hear about Balrogs and dragons and things that Sauron and Morgoth have twisted, this is the first we see of it. He basically twists their mind and basically says, you work for me now. And far off in the darkness he was filled with hatred, being jealous of the work of his peers, whom he desired to make subject to himself. Therefore he gathered to himself spirits out of the halls of Ea that he had perverted to his service, and he deemed himself strong. And seeing now his time, he drew near again to Arda, and looked down upon it, and the beauty of the earth in its spring filled him the more with hate. Now therefore the Valar were gathered upon Almaren, fearing no evil, and because of the light of Iluin they did not perceive the shadow in the north that was cast from afar by Melkor, for he was grown dark as the night of the void. And it is sung that in that feast of the spring of Arda, Tulkas espoused Nessa, sister of Orome, and she danced before the Valar upon the green grass of Almaren. So Valar have gotten married, yes. Tulkas just married Nessa. Then Tulkas slept, being weary and content, and Melkor deemed that his hour had come, and he passed therefore over the walls of night with his host, and came to Middle-earth, afar from the north, and the Valar were not aware of him. Now Melkor began delving and building of a vast fortress deep under earth, began beneath dark mountains, where the beams of Iluin were cold and dim. The stronghold was called Utumno, and though the Valar knew naught of it yet, nevertheless the evil of Melkor and the blight of his hatred flowed out thence, and the spring of Arda was marred. So Morgoth's corruption is literally seeping out and physical form, and in physical form, and corrupting those that are there. Green things fell sick and rotted, and rivers were choked with weeds and slime, and fens were made, rank and poisonous, the breeding place of flies. The forests grew dark and perilous, and the haunts of fear, and beasts became monsters of horn and ivory, and dyed the earth with blood. Then the Valar knew indeed that Melkor was at work again, and they sought for his hiding place. But Melkor, trusting in the strength of Utumno and the might of his servants, came forth suddenly to war, and struck the first blow ere the Valar were prepared. For those that don't know, ere, E-R-E, means before. So Melkor struck first. He struck before the Valar were ready. And he assailed the lights of Iluin and Ormal, and cast down their pillars and broke their lamps. In the overthrow of the mighty pillars, lands were broken and seas arose in tumult, and when the lamps were spilled, destroying flames were poured. Ooh. Gotta adjust my microphone real quick. Panic Attack, thank you for the follow. Much appreciated, my friend. Sorry, y'all, still getting the setup ready to go. And the shape of Arda and the symmetry of its waters and its lands were marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never after restored. In the confusion and the darkness Melkor escaped, though fear fell upon him. For above the roaring of the seas he heard the voice of Manwe as a mighty wind, and the earth trembled beneath the feet of Tulkas. But he came to Utumno ere Tulkas could overtake him, and there he lay hid. And the Valar could not at that time overcome him, for the greater part of his strength was needed to restrain the tumults of the earth and to save from ruin all that could be saved of their labor. And afterwards they feared to rend the earth again until they knew where the children of Iluvatar, or the elves, were dwelling, who were yet to come in the time that is hidden from the Valar. All right, I'm going to pause there for a brief second, take some water, and answer some questions. If anyone has a question about what I just read, feel free to ask it in the comments section below. Also, how's everybody liking the new microphone? If you're just joining, you have my wife to thank for it. She decided that this was a great thing that I could use. Thank you, honey.
You're welcome.
What do I think the Valar looked like? Great question. So the Valar are able to change their form. And in a way, the Valar changing their form is their natural form. They are spirits of consciousness and thought. But they can often take the shape or form of humans or elves, but they are loftier. Their skin is clearer. There is a light that shines from them rather than on them. I always think of Manwe, who is the head of the Valar, as a sort of older wiser, almost Santa Claus looking thing. We're in the Christmas season right now, and it seems like a good enough comparison is all. But I don't think any of the Valar are sort of like that jolly old round tummy. I think the idea of the Valar as being these sort of Adonis looking, statue of David sort of perfect beings. At least that's how they're described. All right. I am going to keep going if there are no more questions. If you do have questions, feel free to ask them while I'm reading. Feel free to just keep that going. Actually, you know what? Maybe I do want to switch this up. No, you know what? It's okay. That's okay. I am going to slightly adjust the mic. Just make it a little bit easier on myself. We're still getting this new setup set up. Beige Gandalf, thank you for the follow and the subscription. Thank you. We got a couple of people to thank, actually. Anything in between, thank you for the follow. Emgron on Twitch, thank you. Appreciate it. Very kind of you all. I'm going to keep it going. It's kind of like they were the okay, so one comment. Yes, so River says it's kind of like they were the personification of their own will. I'd agree with that. Yeah. So Aule, who is the Valar of stone and crafting and metalwork, I imagine he looks like a rough and tumble blacksmith, big heavy muscles, maybe a beard. Yavanna, I imagine, her having a very green outfit, sort of very ethereal, looking more like a druid. I believe I said that already. All right. I am going to keep going. Here we go. Thus ended the spring of Arda. The dwelling of the Valar upon Almaren was utterly destroyed, and they had no abiding place upon the face of the earth. Therefore they departed from Middle-earth, and went to the land of Aman, the westernmost part of all lands upon the borders of the world. Brief pause. This is the Undying Lands. Aman is another name for the continent that is also the Undying Lands. Technically, the continent is named Aman. The Undying Lands is what men call it. Therefore they departed from Middle-earth and went to the land of Aman, the westernmost of all the lands upon the borders of the world. For its west shores look upon the outer sea that is called by the elves Ekaia, encircling the kingdom of Arda. How wide is the sea, none know but the Valar, and beyond it are the walls of night. But the east shore of Aman were the uttermost end of Belagir, the great sea of the west. And since Melkor was returned to Middle-earth, and they could not yet overcome him, the Valar forfeited their dwelling. And upon the shores of the sea they raised the Pelori, the mountains of Aman, highest upon earth. And above all the mountains of the Pelori was that height upon whose summit Manwe set his throne, Taniquetil, the elves named that holy mountain, and Oilos, everlasting whiteness, the Elerina, crowned with stars, and many names besides. But the Sindar spoke of it in their latter tongue as Aman Uilos. From their halls upon Taniquetil, Manwe and Varda could look out across the earth, even into the furthest east. So there were a lot of confusing parts just in that one paragraph. I want to stop there for a brief second. Tolkien's obsession with naming things and giving him many names is front and center here in the Silmarillion. So we just learned of the mountain range that they created and the new home of the Valar. They call it Taniquetil, and that is more or less the name that is created. But as we go further on, we are going to see him refer to it again as Oilos or Elerina. So if you hear those names again, I'll pause and clarify that that is Taniquetil, the place where the Valar live. Dozen donuts. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the gift sub. Much appreciated. Very kind of you. All right. Here we go. Behind the walls of the Pelori, the Valar established their domain in that region which is called Valinor. And there were their houses, their gardens, their towers. In that guarded land, the Valar gathered great stone of light and all the fairest things that were saved from ruin. And many others yet fairer they made anew. The Valinor became more beautiful even than Middle-earth in the spring of Arda. And it was blessed, for the deathless dwelt there. And there not faded or withered. Neither was there any stain upon flower or leaf in the land, nor any corruption or sickness in anything that lived. For the very stones and waters were hallowed. Amy, thank you for the gift sub. Maggie Locks, thank you for the follow. I believe we are on a hype train, which is a Twitch thing I just learned, so thank you all very much. I appreciate the support. It means a lot. Let's keep it going. And when Valinor was full wrought, and the mansions of the Valar were established in the midst of the plains beyond the mountains, they built their city, Valmar of many bells. Before its western gate there was a green mound, Ezelohar, that is named also Corolier, and Yavanna hallowed it. If it sounds like I'm pronouncing some of these names incorrectly, it's because I am. Tolkien has a lot of names, even I don't know them. And Yavanna hallowed it. And she sat there long upon the green grass and sang a song of power, in which was set all her thought of things that grow in the earth. But Nienna thought in silence, and watered the mold with tears. In that time the Valar were gathered together to hear the song of Yavanna, and they sat silent upon their thrones of council in the Mahanazar, the Ring of Doom, near to the golden gates of Valmar. And Yavanna Kementari sang before them, and they watched. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth 2 slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour. Nor was there any other sound save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower, and thus there awoke in the world the 2 trees of Valinor. Of all things which Yavanna made, they have most renown. And about their fate, all the tales of the elder days are woven. So these trees are sort of a foil to the lamps. The lamps were created in Middle-earth, but they were destroyed. These trees were created in the Undying Lands, in Valinor. And if you've seen one of my videos already, you know what happens to these trees. And you know what happens because of what happens to these trees. Oh, actually, if anyone has any questions, this seems like a good place to pause for a moment. Okay, River's got a question. So where are these trees compared to Middle-earth? So these trees are on the other continent. They are on the far west in the continent of Valinor, or the Undying Lands. All right. So Jam asked, Tom Bombadil is known for singing everywhere he goes. Is this because he's creating or expressing his power, or just because he likes to sing? So that is a great question, because Tom Bombadil is an enigma for so much of the Tolkien universe and so many of its fans, including myself. Tom Bombadil, to some, is the equivalent of God, or Eru, or Iluvatar. Eru Iluvatar is the god of Tolkien's universe. And some people think that Tom Bombadil is God. Excuse me. Others think he is one of the Ainur, one of the lesser gods that came down to Middle-earth and never revealed him or herself. Some think he is a Maiar. Others think he is one of the Valar in disguise. We don't really know. But Tolkien always said that words have a different power in Middle-earth and in the Undying Lands, different than what is here. There is a certain magic to certain people's words. Sauron could literally corrupt someone's mind in just speaking to them with his magic. In the same way, Tom Bombadil might be able to control some of nature in his area. For those that have not read the Fellowship of the Ring book, Tom Bombadil is one of the characters that appears in the book but not the movie. He is a jolly old man that reminds me of like a druid version of Santa Claus. Oh, Epi, thank you. He just gifted a tier 1 sub. Very kind of you. Thank you. Is Eru Tolkien's self-insert? Some people have read into that. Yes. Tom Bombadil was originally a different type of character. He was a children's character, I believe, that Tolkien created for his kids, if I'm not mistaken. So when Tolkien put Tom Bombadil in the story, it's possible that it was just for his kids, or maybe he had another plan that he would reveal later. But I don't think so. We'll see if the new Tolkien book that's coming out soon does anything to confirm or deny that. We'll see. Let's keep it going here. So Yavanna had just created the 2 trees. The one had leaves of dark green that beneath were a shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath these dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new opened beach, and their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to the glowing horn and spilled of a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossom of the tree there came forth warmth and the great light. Telperion, the one was called in Valinor, and Silfon, and Nunqualote, and many other names. I'll take a brief pause here. This is where we get Tolkien introducing names. So the tree's name is Telperion, but it's also called Silphion and Nunqualote and many other names. So it is just something that you kind of have to get used to in Tolkien. But it's also a reason that people stop reading, is because it's confusing. Why give a tree 7 different names? Well, that was what Tolkien's whole thing was about. You create these names, and these sort of different names have different powers in a way. But Laurelin, the other, was Malindala and Kulurian, and many names in song beside. Again, different names. I'm probably pronouncing a few of these incorrectly. I apologize. Here we go. In 7 hours, the glory of each tree waxed to full and waned again to naught, and each awoke once more to life an hour before the other ceased to shine. Thus in Valinor, twice every day there came a gentle hour of softer light, where both trees were faint and their gold and silver beams were mingled. Telperion was the elder of the trees, and came first to full stature and to bloom. And that first hour in which he shone, the white glimmer of the silver dawn, the Valar reckoned not unto the tales of the hour, but named it the opening hour. And O in opening is capitalized, and H in hour is capitalized. And counted from it the ages of their reign in Valinor. Therefore, at the 6th hour of the first day, and of all the joyful days thereafter, until the darkening of Valinor, Telperion ceased his time of flower, and at the 12th hour Laurelin her blossoming. And each day of the Valar in Aman contained 12 hours, and ended with the second mingling of the light, in which Laurelin was waning, but Telperion was waxing. But the light was spilled from the trees. But the light that was spilled from the trees endured long, ere it was taken up into the airs or sank down into the earth, and the dews of Telperion and the rain that fell from Laurelin, Varda hoarded in great vats like shining lakes, that were to all the land of the Valar as wells of water and of light. Thus began the days of bliss of Valinor, and thus began also the count of time. So I'll take a brief pause there, and I can take some questions as well. So this is the beginning of time, and we are looking at... Oh, go ahead. And we are looking at more or less the happiest point in the book. Oh, it looks like we got some new emotes. We got Hype Swipe, Shield, Hype Fighter, Hype Rip, Hype Kick. Thank you all. I appreciate the support. The Lack Schlack, thank you very much for the bits. Very kind of you. All right, so go ahead and write your questions down in the comment section below.
Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. So if Jam asks, if names have power, do they have the ability to cause harm to a person when spoken like we see in other fantasy universes? Yes, they do. We're not going to see it for quite a while as we continue to read, but actually, could I get some more water? Can I ask you for more?
Hold my diffuser.
Yes, I can hold your diffuser. T. Bryant, thank you for the follow. Appreciate it. So yes, we are going to see the sun and moon be created soon, and in their names are the creation of power, and the names do have a power, yeah. In the same way that, like, calling someone a mean name can hurt someone, the names in Tolkien's universe have a power over people. So you can speak and have a sort of, think of it like a magical power in our terms of how we understand fantasy in something like Harry Potter. People are saying hi in the chat to you, honey.
Hello.
She says hi.
Okay, go check out my new diffuser. One ice cube?
One ice cube is fine. Thank you. Mowage. Did I say there was a new Tolkien book coming out? Yes, I did. It is called The Nature of Middle-earth. It is most likely going to be the last book we have of his. It is a compilation of his notes about the nature itself of Middle-earth. I have a feeling some of the notes might repeat themselves because a lot of the books that are written after the Silmarillion are grouped up in a way that it's more or less different drafts of the same story. How does that work, and do we know what it's going to... So the nature of Middle-earth, we think, is going to be describing more or less how the actual nature is. Maybe we get some more information about what lies beneath in the seas, or mountain ranges and what's on them, or more about the eagles, or rather than the human elf dwarf part, maybe we get the plants and animals part. Is that book already out? I thought it didn't come out till May or June of next year. I could be wrong about that, though. I'd be happy to be wrong about that. Is it going to be canon or just his notes? So I would consider anything that Tolkien publishes canon, with the exception of, unless it's noted otherwise, that there are drafts or that they are earlier drafts of things that have already been published. That's kind of how I do my canon. But you can, if you want to consider it canon, that's fine. I have no problem with anybody, considering different things. Like Sauron was almost a talking cat. I'm going to explain that in a video later. Okay, so it's not out. It will be available in June, but it can be pre-ordered. Good to know. Suspicious Duck, thank you for the follow. Appreciate you being here. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to keep going. We are just wrapping up this chapter on the beginning of days. I've got about 3 or 4 more pages to go. And then I'll take some more questions. So we just started the count of time, literally when time started to be counted. But as the ages drew on to the hour appointed by Iluvatar for the coming of the firstborn, which is the elves, Middle-earth lay in a twilight beneath the stars that Varda had wrought in the age forgotten of her labors in Ea, and Ea is the physical world. And in the darkness Melkor dwelt, and still often walked abroad in many shapes of power and fear, and he wielded cold and fire from the tops of the mountains to the deep furnaces that are beneath them, and whatsoever was cruel or violent or deadly in those days is laid to his charge. From the beauty and bliss of Valinor, the Valar came seldom over the mountains to Middle-earth, but gave to the land beyond the Pelori their care and their love. And in the midst of the blessed realm there were mansions of Aule, and there he labored long, for in the making of all things in that land he had the chief part, and he wrought there many beautiful and shapely works, both openly and in secret. Of him comes the lore and knowledge of the earth, and of all things that it contains, whether the lore of those that make not but things, but seek only for the understanding of what is, or the lore of the all craftsmen. So that's a little bit of a confusing part. Basically, one of the Valar, named Aule, is the craftsman, and Tolkien here is describing sort of what happens in between, after the trees are created. I'll back up for just a second. And to the tiller and the husbandman also. Sorry, this is the confusing part. Though these last and all that deal with things that grow and bear fruit must look also to the spouse of Aule. So now we go to Aule's spouse, who is Yavanna, the one that just created the trees. Yavanna commentari. Aule it is who is named the friend of the Noldor, who are a group of elves we'll hear about later. For of him they learned much in after days, and they are the most skilled of the elves, and in their fashion according to the gifts which Iluvatar gave to them. They added much to his teaching, delighting in tongues and in scripts and in the figures of broidery, of drawing and of carving. The Noldor also it was who first achieved the making of gems, and the fairest of all gems were the Silmarils, and they are lost. I'll take a brief pause there, because I seem to remember someone saying that they were embroidering a Lord of the Rings map. Embroidery is one of the many talents of the elves, and Tolkien mentions it here. But Manwe Sulimo, who is the head of the Valar, highest and holiest of the Valar, sat upon the border of Aman, forsaking not in his thought the outer lands. For his throne was set in majesty upon the pinnacle of Taniquetil, the mountain range, the highest of the mountains in the world, standing upon the margin of the sea. Spirits in the shape of hawks and eagles flew ever to and from his halls, and their eyes could see to the depths of the sea and pierce the hidden caverns beneath the world. Thus they brought word to him of well nigh all that passed in Arda. Yet some things were hidden, even from the eyes of Manwe and the servants of Manwe. For where Melkor sat in his dark, thought impenetrable shadows lay. Manwe has no thought for his own honor, and is not jealous of his power, but rules all to peace. The Vanyar he loved best of all the elves, and of him they received songs and poetry, for poetry is the delight of Manwe. And the song of words is his music. His raiment is blue, and blue is the fire of his eyes, and his scepter is of sapphire, which the Noldor wrought for him. And he was appointed to be the vice-gerent of Iluvatar, king of the world of Valar and Elves and Men, and the chief defense against the evil of Melkor. With Manwe dwelt Varda, the most beautiful, she who in the Sindarin tongue is named Elbereth, queen of the Valar, makers of the stars, and with them were the great host of spirits in blessedness. So, for those, I think someone asked previously what the Valar look like. So we then kind of get a description of the Valar, or at least of Manwe. He's got a very blue raiment. He's got the sapphires. He's got the bright blue eyes. Also, if anyone has read the original Return of the King book, Elbereth is the password that Sam uses for Frodo. When Frodo gets captured by the orcs and taken to the tower, Sam lets him know that it is him coming up again by using the word Elbereth, literally calling upon one of the Valar. I don't think Sam fully understands the importance of what he's saying or the name he's invoking, but I think it's important that people realize what's going on. All right, let's take some questions. Do the Silmarils have any special powers? So we'll get to that in a little bit, but to give you an idea, the Silmarils are gems that contain the light of the world, that come from the two trees. But we'll get to that in a bit. Do they have special powers? In a way, but they are more or less beautiful gems. Oh, you know what? There may actually be 2 books coming out. Someone in the chat just said there's one called The Nature of Middle-earth and The Science of Middle-earth. It might be 2 books. Are both of them by J.R.R. Tolkien? Because there are companion books that come out. We'll see how that goes. Tolkien got his monotheistic cake and a pantheon of frosting on it. That is absolutely correct. Great comment. Very true. Okay, so yes, someone else in the comments said the science one is someone's analysis of Tolkien's work. Well, that'll be interesting. I might read that one. Can all elves see the future and do magic? We see a number of elves wield magic, but it's never totally clear if all elves have the same kind of magic. Some are gifted in, craftsmanship. Some make beautiful music. Some build things. Some create. Some care for nature. But it's never terribly clear which elves have which power, at least to me. All right. Let's keep it going, shall we? We're going to talk about Ulmo now. But Ulmo was alone, and he abode not in Valinor, nor ever came thither unless there were need of a great council. He dwelt from the beginning of Arda in the outer ocean, and still he dwells there. Thence he governs the flowing of all waters, and the ebbing and course of all rivers, and the replenishment of springs, the distilling of all dews, and rain in every land beneath the sky. In the deep places he gives thought to music, great and terrible, and the echo of that music runs through all the veins of the world in sorrow and in joy. For if joyful is the fountain that rises in the sun, its springs are the wells of sorrow unfathomed at the foundations of the earth. The Teleri learned much from Ulmo. The Teleri are a group of elves that lived by the coast. We'll hear a lot more about the Teleri later. and for this reason their music has both sadness and enchantment. Salmar came with him to Arda, and he who made the horn of Ulmo, that none may ever forget who once has heard of them. And Osse and Uinen also, to whom he gave the government of the waves and the movement of the inner seas, and many other spirits beside. You'll remember Osse and Uinen were the Maiar that work with Ulmo underwater. Ulmo, think of Ulmo a little bit like Poseidon, or a Poseidon-like character. He is a very reclusive character. He doesn't always come to be with people, but when he does, it's a sign that there are important things going on. So when Ulmo shows up, you know things are either very bad or something very bad is about to happen. And thus it was by the power of Ulmo that even under the darkness of Melkor, life coursed still through many secret lodes, and the earth did not die. And to all who were lost in the darkness or wandered far from that light of the Valar, the ear of Ulmo was ever present. Nor has he ever forsaken Middle-earth, and whatsoever may since have befallen of ruin or of change, he has not ceased to take thought of it, and will not until the end of days. This is partially why I think Ulmo is one of my favorite characters, at least in terms of the Valar. He never gives up on the elves, on men, on dwarves. He is there for all living creatures, and I love that about him. And in that time of dark, Yavanna also was unwilling to utterly forsake the outer lands. For all things that grow are dear to her, and she mourned for the works that she had begun in Middle-earth, but Melkor had marred. Therefore, leaving the house of Aule and flowering meads of Valinor, she would come at times and heal the hurts of Melkor, and returning, she would ever urge the Valar to that war with his evil domain that they surely wage ere the coming of the firstborn. And Orome, tamer of beasts, would ride too at whiles in the darkness of the unlit forests. As a mighty hunter he came with spear and bow, pursuing to the death the monsters and fell creatures of the kingdom of Melkor. And his white horse, Nahar, shone like silver in the shadows. Then the sleeping earth trembled at the beat of his golden hooves, and in the twilight of that world Orome would sound the Valaroma, his great horn upon the plains of Arda, whereat the mountains echoed, and the shadows of evil fled away. And Melkor himself quailed in Utumno, foreboding the wrath to come. But even as Orome passed, the servants of Melkor would gather again, and the lands were filled with shadow and deceit. Now all is said concerning the manner of the earth and its rulers in the beginning of days, and ere the world became such as the children of Iluvatar have known it. For elves and men are the children of Iluvatar, and since they understood not fully that theme by which the children entered into the music, none of the Ainur dared to add anything in their fashion. So to explain that a little bit, we're going to go back and reference the previous part that we read. The world in Tolkien's universe was literally created by the music of the Ainur. The Ainur are the lesser gods. The Valar are the Ainur. And in creating the music, they created the world, the physical space of the world. And in doing so, they're now scared to change anything about it. But for which reason the Valar are to these kindred rather their elders and their chieftains than their masters. And if ever in their dwelling with elves and men the Ainur have endeavored to force them when they would not be guided, seldom has this turned to good, howsoever good the intent. The dealings of the Ainur have indeed been mostly good with the elves, for Iluvatar made them more like in nature to the Ainur, though less in might and stature, whereas to men he gave strange gifts. For it is said that after the departure of the Valar there was silence, and for an age Iluvatar sat alone in thought. Then he spoke and said, "Behold, I love the earth, which shall be a mansion for the Quendi and the Atani. But the Quendi shall be the fairest of all earthly creatures, and they shall have and shall conceive and bring forth more beauty than any of my children, and they shall have the greater bliss of the world." The Quendi are the elves. "But for the Atani, I will give a new gift. Therefore he willed that the hearts of men," so the Atani are the men, "therefore he willed that the hearts of men should seek beyond the world, and should find no rest therein, but there should have a virtue to shape their life amid the powers and chances of the world, beyond the music of the Ainur, which is as fate to all things else. And of their operation everything should be in form and deed completed, and the world fulfilled unto the last and the smallest." So what it's saying there is Eru, Iluvatar, God in Tolkien's universe, is more or less saying the elves are going to be immortal, and that is their creation, that is their being. But men are not going to be immortal. They are not tied to this dimension, this planet. And in doing so, men think themselves important, or rather the human race thinks themselves important, though they live much a shorter time than the elves. But Iluvatar knew that men, being set amid the turmoils of the powers of the world, would often stray, and would not use their gifts in harmony, and he said, "These too, in their time, shall find that all that they do rebounds at the end only to the glory of my work." Yet the elves believe that men are often a grief to Manwe, who knows most of the mind of Iluvatar. For it seems to the elves that men resemble Melkor most of all the Ainur, although he has ever feared and hated them, even those that served him. It is one with this gift of freedom that the children of men dwell only a short space in the world alive, and are not bound to it, and depart soon whither the elves know not. Whereas the elves remain until the end of days, and their love of the earth and all the world is more single and more poignant therefore, and as the years lengthen, ever more sorrowful. For the elves die not until the world dies, unless they are slain or waste in grief, and to both these seeming deaths they are subject. Neither does age subdue their strength, unless one grows weary after 10,000 centuries, and dying they are gathered in the halls of Mandos in Valinor, whence they may in time return. This is kind of explaining where elves go when they die. I did make a video about it on TikTok briefly. And elves are tied to the world, the physical world. Their souls literally cannot leave. It is only the gift of men, literally the gift of death, that men have that allow them to leave. So even if an elf wanted to no longer exist, that's not an option for them. Let's continue. Also, the halls of Mandos, briefly. The halls of Mandos are the place where the elves' souls go if they die. Mandos is one of the Valar. Let's continue. But the sons of men die indeed, and leave the world, wherefore they are called the guests, or the strangers. Death is their fate, the gift of Iluvatar, which, as time wears, even the powers shall envy. But Melkor has cast his shadow upon it, and confounded it with darkness, and brought forth evil out of good, and fear out of hope. Yet of old the Valar declared to the elves in Valinor that men shall join in the second music of the Ainur, whereas Iluvatar has not revealed what his purpose for the elves after the world's end, and Melkor has not discovered it. All right, that is chapter 1 of the Silmarillion, of the Quenta Silmarillion. I am going to take a quick break there. We've been at this about an hour. And you know what? If I'm being totally honest, I may leave these in hour-long segments so that if I ever do post these on YouTube, I have a little bit of leeway. I think next time we pick up, maybe next Sunday, we do chapters 2 and 3 of Aule and Yavanna, and of the coming of the elves. So I'll take any questions right now, if anyone has them. Let's see. So wait, the elves look like Melkor. Not necessarily look like Melkor, but elves who are a little bit jealous of men sometimes kind of relate Melkor to the men, or men to Melkor. I guess, yeah, they relate men to Melkor in that men are greedy, men desire power, men are able to be corrupted much more easily, very similar to Melkor. So maybe the comparison's not quite as fair as the elves make it out to be, but I think men deserve a little bit of credit. Oh, Amy says that. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Do I think the Amazon show will make a lot of Lord of the Rings content? I hope so, but I don't think a lot of the Silmarillion is going to be a part of it. I think, if anything, they will do I believe the rumors that the television show will be about the Second Age. The Second Age focuses mostly on men on an island in between Valinor and Middle-earth called Numenor. So we'll see how that goes. There was a darker valley where souls get sucked into from the unfinished tales. I don't remember the name. You know what? I don't remember the name of that either, but I know what you are talking about. You know what? Maybe that's my next book. Maybe we read Unfinished Tales. That might be it. That might be it. Feanor has entered the chat. Oh, he will. He will.